We're going to get started in a few minutes. We're just waiting for a few other people to join us.
Okay, I have about 3 minutes after, so I think it's best if we get started. Good afternoon or good morning to those of you out in the west area of the country. My name is Carrie Shannard-Kunders. I am chair of NASCA's Education Committee, and I'll be hosting this afternoon's webinar along with NASCA's Kathy Keogh, who is manning the chat. You perhaps saw scrolling information while waiting for the webinar to start, where we included our sponsors, a disclaimer, some housekeeping issues and announcements. Hopefully you were able to peruse through those. Today's webinar and all of our webinars throughout the year would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors, so thank you, sponsors. One of our newest sponsors just happens to be providing today's 2022 update on the Support Act, to include the DEA suspicious order monitoring proposed rules and the effect of those. This is a sizzling hot topic right now and should be very thought-provoking. Please place your questions in the chat box and they will be addressed at the end of the presentation. I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to introduce Sumit Singh, CEO of Pharma Solutions, and Deneen Fumich, Director of Strategic Affairs at Pharma Solutions, who are both presenting today. Sumit Singh founded Pharma Solutions in October of 2015. As its CEO, he is responsible for leading the development and implementation of the company's strategic vision. Sumit is a thought leader in this space, having been invited to educate state regulatory agencies, published in trade publications, including Pharmaceutical Commerce and Pharmacy Times, has been invited to speak at multiple industry events, including ACI's Controlled Substance Summit, IQPC's Pharmaceutical Traceability Forum, the PBOA's annual meeting and conference, and Chain 76. And don't ask me what all of those acronyms mean. And Deneen Fumich is a pharmacist and the Director of Regulatory Affairs for Pharma Solutions USA, Inc., heading industry and regulatory agency relations, partnerships, and solution development. Prior to Pharma Solutions' role, she has spent the last 16 years as the Senior Manager of Distribution Compliance at Viatris, or formerly known as Mylan, developing, leading, and managing over 400 state licenses, including DEA accreditation, developing a state compliance reporting process, developing strategic timelines for state licensing during decommissioning, acquisitions, and integration initiatives. And she has assisted with suspicious order monitoring. Prior to Beatrice, Deneen spent 13 years as a pick for a major retail pharmacy, Rite Aid, a graduate of West Virginia University School of Pharmacy. She obtained her West Virginia pharmacist license in 1993. With that, I am very happy to turn it over to Deneen and Samit.
Thank you very much, Carrie, and thank you, Kathy, for allowing us to present today. And a big thank you to the NASCA membership for welcoming us and allowing us to be a sponsor. We're very excited about the sponsorship and working with everybody within the membership. So moving right along, just a quick overview, of our company. We've been in the business for over 6 years. A couple of our solutions overview, we're very much focused on drug and device supply chain compliance, spanning technology solutions, research, licensing, regulatory affairs, quality, and certifications and accreditations. So we have an action-packed agenda here for you today. I'm going to turn it over to Deneen in a second here to go over the current SOM regulation. So that's kind of where we're going to start, is current SOM regulation. What is the federal regulatory framework as we understand it pre-Support Act, which the proposed rules are heading towards finalization. And then so we'll go over what is SOM regulatory review and the DEA history of SOM requirements, and then specifically we'll cover the Support Act. There's some pretty interesting things that are stemming from the Support Act, including definitions, security controls, additional procedures, and of course, most important, the crux of the presentation today is going to be the impact to state agencies. And then Deneen was kind enough to include a bonus for the membership today. Great. So with that, I'll turn it over again to Deneen.
Okay, again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, NASCA, for allowing us to be here and for the presentation. And as Samit stated, between 1984 and 2022, for many, many years, there's been no action from the DEA. So some exciting times and different times coming up. But what is suspicious order monitoring? Why is it? What is it, and why is it important? And what it is it really helps all players in the pharmaceutical supply chain and within our regulatory agencies to ensure and protect the health and safety of our general public. I know for those that are from our agencies that are online, that's one of the biggest areas of concern. And then why we've seen lately, and why is it a hot topic, is because of the opioid abuse crisis in the United States. And this really has stemmed to show how important having safe and ethical practices are throughout all the steps of the supply chain and the measures. And one of those ways to have some control and to have transparency of opioid products or any controlled substance is really through the suspicious order monitoring programs that we have in place. So what are the overview or requirements for a suspicious order monitoring program? Well, first, we look at the Controlled Substance Act and the precedents of that. And we know the act itself goes over physical security, whether you're manufacturer, wholesaler, down to pharmacies. What is that? Maybe for a manufacturer, wholesaler, it's your cages, it's your vaults, the thickness and of those items and how you monitor in your camera placements. For pharmacies, they can have a locked area or they can intermix amongst their drugs, but are they doing that right? Record keeping, whether you're a pharmacy all the way up to a manufacturer, that is so important, not only from a DEA perspective, but from a state perspective. And if you go through some of the state or through some of the DEA issues with companies, a lot of that is record keeping. and it's maintaining as a company the good record keeping requirements dictated not only by our DEA, the Controlled Substance Act, but by our states. And you'll see throughout the years, it may not have been part of the regulation, but definitely has come through advisory letters and through looking at disciplinary actions and court proceedings is know your customer. And that is the initial and the ongoing, and then how the evolving of the suspicious order monitoring program have evolved from doing a 2 times an average order to very sophisticated models. So we've seen that grow, and again, without any law and regulation changes. So we all know that the Federal Controlled Substance Act is CFR 21, Chapter 1300 to end, but more importantly, it's 1301.74B. And this is where we do find the law that the registrant shall design and operate a system to disclose suspicious orders, that the registrant shall inform the field division office of the administration in this area of suspicious orders when discovered, and that suspicious orders shall include unusual size, orders of deviating substantially from a normal pattern, and orders of unusual frequency. And so, Sumit, if you'd like to go through some of the extras that have been added on through the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Deneen. So yeah, just to kind of circle that in, the Controlled Substance Act was obviously, the thing that started it all, right? It established precedents. It established, this is what a SOM program should look like. This is what a Know Your Customer program should look like. There's an initial component, there's an ongoing component, and a part of the ongoing component of Know Your Customer is suspicious order monitoring. So really the way to look at this graph is a taxonomy, heading from the very top, an overview, all the way down to the very bottom, which is very specific. Is how we kind of conceptualize regulation, federal regulation of the sale of controlled substances. So what happened was really, there was an expansion of Know Your Customer due diligence. So there wasn't new legislation passed. The rules, weren't, the CFR wasn't amended or wasn't added to for a significant period of time. And so the way regulation changed or adapted to really, industry and just general involvement of the industry was through these 3 specific was through a handful of issues, but these 3 really make a point as far as the effect that it had on initial and ongoing Know Your Customer. So Southwood was pretty early on, and Southwood really covered the Know Your Customer aspects in terms of there was a wholesale distributor, called Southwood, and they were selling, pretty much without regard to SOM or without regard to doing any due diligence on their customers. Specifically, there was a customer of theirs. I think the company name was MedPack or Medavail, and it was an online. It was basically an online pharmacy that was selling controlled substances online, right, making it available to customers online. And I think something to the tune of like 99% of prescription orders were coming online by patients online, and we're being filled by that pharmacy, and Southwood was happily supplying that pharmacy. So one of the first things that kind of started this thing was the DEA came in 2007, said, hey, this is not okay anymore, right? It was never okay, but now really, we're getting on top of people. We're getting on top of distributors, and we're really, getting serious about this requirement. So it was kind of like a announcement to industry was, you have to do due diligence on a customer, which includes but is not limited to. And if I can just point to the taxonomy again, Know Your Customer. So Southwood really expanded all of this stuff. So including on an initial basis, what is the ratio of, well, first, do they fill online prescription orders, right? Is there any kind of, actual patient to pharmacist kind of relationship, right? Was one part of it. The second part of it was what's the ratio of controlled substances to regular products, right? A lot of this stuff came out of Southwood. What the Renazzi letters did was, I think it was the acting director of the DEA at the time, is basically it gave a framework. It gave about 15 questions on what initial know your customer needs to look like. And so that was really kind of like a statement piece. It was kind of a notice to industry saying, look, it's not codified in the laws. We're not going to hold you to this. This isn't the exact thing that's applicable to registrants and their businesses, but this is a starting framework for what needs to be included in initial KYC. And it kind of covered, a few parts of Southwood. Morrison-Dixon was much more recent. That happened in 2018. Was the I believe it was administrative order, and that was ultimately fought and settled, and they figured all that piece of it out. But basically, what happened was the DEA charged Morrison-Dixon allegedly that Morrison-Dixon wasn't doing, not so much that their processes weren't correct, because there wasn't much due diligence done by the DEA on that. More so what was the actual performance of the SOM system, right? So Morrison-Dixon, as you may or may not know, is a very large regional wholesaler based in the South, based in Louisiana. And they have, facilities in, I believe, in Texas and Louisiana, and kind of spread out through the South. And a lot of, hospitals and independent pharmacies all work with Morrison-Dixon. They compete for market share against Cardinal, McKesson, and Amerisource, and they've held out pretty well in their 125 plus year history. And so so even though Morrison-Dixon had some kind of SOM in place, it was the performance of the SOM which was the big focus for the DEA in their allegations against the company. And so stuff like you're selling to the top, you're selling to 10 out of 10 customers of the top controlled substance prescribers in Louisiana, and things like that. They brought in very specific statistical analysis. They're looking at the mean, they're looking at ratios, they're looking at XYZ. So again, it was another iteration of, hey, these are the questions, these are the basics you need to look at. These are actual questions you need to look at. And then with Morrison-Dixon, this is the actual statistical analysis that that we're looking at, that by the transit property you need to perform on your orders before they're sent out. And so the expansion of the KYC due diligence past the CFR, and there's more than these, right? There's more letters, there's more, there's a lot more case law against Cardinal and Masters, which we'll get to in a second, which is very important. So moving right along, as far as the identification requirement goes, I'm sorry, as far as the various requirements go within the expansion of SOM, was really focused on this piece. So so in the law, it says, hey, you have to have a system. You have to have a system to detect suspicious orders, and you have to have a system to detect suspicious orders. And these are the types of orders that need to be flagged. It's orders with a lot of frequency, with a suspicious. You need to look at pattern, frequency, and size to identify issues within your orders. And so the way that was expanded was a handful of ways. So as far as the identification requirement goes, what was really key was again masters. That played a big part in excuse me, in the identification requirement, as far as looking at the orders and what you're actually looking for. So as far as the identification requirement goes, sorry guys, just lost my notes here. As far as the identification requirements go, the idea was, again, when you're looking at suspicious orders initially, what are the various factors that you're looking at? Is it, part of it is statistical analysis. Once you identify suspicious order, then there has to be a due diligence requirement. The due diligence requirement must, quote unquote, dispel suspicion. And so, so part of dispelling the suspicion is looking at, some of the initial KYC that was performed and some of the ongoing KYC that was required to, make sure that this order is being reviewed by somebody. A lot of people like to go and visit the stores, call the stores. Hey, we noticed that there was an increase in purchases. There has to be actual due diligence, and there has to be actual documentation of that due diligence, because what the DEA is going to come in and say is, okay, show me all the orders that were identified per the identification requirement. Now show me all the due diligence that was performed on these orders that allowed you to go ahead and ship the order, and or show me why you marked it as suspicious and reported it to the DEA. And so the due diligence is a very important component, and it is directly impacted by the Support Act, which we'll get into in a little bit. The reporting requirement is straightforward, right? And this is also affected by the Support Act, but basically what the reporting requirement is, and this really directly points to the CFR. If you identify an order and you do the due diligence and it's not okay, you do confirm that it is suspicious, then that order must be reported. And if it's not reported, then every single order that you didn't ship based on, identifying that it is suspicious is a violation. And so that's the reporting requirement is very straightforward. That points directly to the CFR. And then finally, the shipping requirement. This points to masters as well. If you identify as suspicious and you report it to the DEA, then you cannot fill the order, and you can't fill the order until you do all your due diligence and et cetera and so on. And so that's the last piece, right? It's very kind of logical as it goes through. You identify it, you determine whether it's suspicious or not. If it is suspicious, you report it and you don't ship it. So that was a way that SOM continued to be fleshed out in terms of requirements to industry, to registrants, to distributors. Characteristics of a robust SOM program, the application of the standards was know your customer materials review. We went over that. So when that really speaks to the due diligence requirement previously. So you want to revisit the ratio of controlled substances to non-controlled substances. You want to review, are these orders coming in and are they for cash pay or insurance pay, and so on. Real-time statistical analysis speaks to the reporting requirement. The statistical analysis required is centers around pattern frequency and size. So we have a product called Navigate SOM, which is a suspicious order monitoring cloud-based solution. And we look at a handful of things. We have algorithms specific to frequency. How many times did a customer order this specific NDC over a number of days, over a number of weeks, over a number of months, et cetera, and so on. Their ongoing running average over the last week or month, and this is all configurable, the real-time running average of over the last week or month or year is used as an algorithm. One of the algorithms that we're particularly proud of is utilization of morphine equivalency. So just a quick 30-second background on that is one thing that we look at is we look at the total amount of opioid actually sent within an order, and we do that by leveraging a calculation that's typically reserved for dispensing. So dispensing uses something called morphine equivalency. It's like a benchmark, right? It kind of puts all the different drug opioid types onto the same benchmark, which is 1 milligram of morphine. So for example, hydromorphone is 4 times more potent, has 4 times the amount of opioid as morphine does. So it's that coefficient is 4x, right? And so it's part of the statistical analysis and calculation of how much opioid. So the dispensing standard is typically, you don't want to give more than, I think it's 50 milligrams of opioid to any individual on any given day, right? So you limit your dispensing accordingly. And so we're able to kind of reverse engineer that and calculate the amount of opioid using a standard benchmark across all NDCs. Establishing establishing high standard implementation of regulatory standards, size, frequency, geographic trends kind of points to the statistical analysis. Criteria for proper algorithmic flagging kind of goes back to number 2 and 3. Criteria for proper human intervention and investigation. So masters, for example, as far as the due diligence and dispelling suspicion, as far as that goes, it's not even enough. So in your SOM program, you go and an order is flagged because the number of NDs, the amount of product average running order was too high. You ordered 8 bottles of oxycodone, 30 milligrams, and the running average per month is say 4 or something, right? So okay, that's a flag. It's 2 times or above your average order, right? And so what does that investigation look like? So master says not only do you have to go and call the pharmacy and say, okay, what happened here? Why was there such a big order? That's A. B, you also have to document it. Okay, I spoke to Bruce at Main Street Pharmacy in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and this is what happened, XYZ. And then you actually also have to do a third step, which is it has to be accurate. You have to go and say that. So, or you have to go and do due diligence to see, is what the pharmacy telling me actually accurate? So for example, if Bruce at Main Street Pharmacy in Kalamazoo, Michigan says, oh, an independent pharmacy, down the street sold, closed down, sold to Walgreens, whatever. And so we're getting a lot of the prescription overflow. You have to go and check, did the pharmacy down the street actually close, and then document it accordingly. So so obviously, as you can see, this is a pretty big issue for a lot of companies, because that's a lot of bandwidth. That's a lot of, it can take half an hour or an hour to investigate each order. And, depending on how many orders you're doing, that's a huge cost to large companies. Criteria for reporting a suspicious order is pretty straightforward, and we'll get to that in a second, actually, with the Support Act. Following established policies and procedures. So this is critical. It was especially critical in the master's case, because they basically said every order of interest that came in that was flagged as an order of interest was a flagged order. So a way to look at masters, one of the big reasons why masters was such a big fight, and they ultimately had their registration revoked, was because they put in a set of policies and procedures, and then they didn't follow the policies and procedures to the T. So this is where policies and procedures really plays a big role. The membership today and as regulators, all you can really go off is documentation and policy and procedures, right? Policy and procedures being a type of documentation. So if you're not following that, or if there's no documentation, then there isn't really any argument or what have you, doesn't really hold a lot of water. Identify failure points of process systems, and then just ongoing quality review, and then establishing criteria for documentation for all components, right? Which we kind of talked about. So the Support Act, this is a big component of it. Right on time, 12:30. So there's five major changes that were that can be attributed to the Support Act, as far as from what we understand and what we feel, right? Authorities citation update. I'm sorry. So these are actually 5 specific changes that weren't really so much of a not necessarily whether they played a big role or not, but these are the overarching big changes that the Support Act is creating. So there's a couple citation updates that weren't circumstantial according to number 1. Additional definitions within section 1301.01 is very substantial, which is the next slide. Number 3, citation related, not really circumstantial. And then 4 and 5 are also covered on this slide. Other security controls and then additional procedures for identifying and reporting suspicious orders. And so we'll get back to all those. So the next, so we'll look at number 2 first, which is the additional definitions. The additional definitions were substantial, were carry a high impact, because for the first time, the word due diligence is codified, is actually included within the rule. So due diligence, what they say is reasonable and documented investigation into persons and orders. Again, remember the due diligence requirement that I was talking about that was expanded with masters was never codified. That was an expansion using case law saying, hey, now this is what's required. Razazi letters, Southwood, masters. For now, the Support Act is kind of plugging that hole, kind of supplementing, the existing CFR to catch up to the expectations that the DEA has for actually preventing the diversion of controlled substances. So that was due diligence. Order is defined. So when you get down into some of the nuances with for example, Cardinal, there's a case with Cardinal. What happened with Cardinal, allegedly, what have you, is simply that Cardinal sales reps were allegedly causing gaming the system, gaming the suspicious order monitoring system, right? So like, for example, if the sales rep knew that 10 bottles would flag, 9 bottles would flag, but 8 bottles wouldn't flag, they would slowly but surely or slyly communicate that to the customer. Don't order 10, don't order 9, but if you order 8, it should be fine. Or, don't order 10 in one go, order 2 for the next 5 days, and you'll have the quantity that you're looking for, but it won't flag our system, stuff like that. So kind of the way they got around that was because, an order wasn't fully defined. An order was like, hey, what is put in the system? Now is fully defined as any communication proposing or requesting distribution by a customer. Granted, it's not just a pricing request or anything, right? Saying, I want 10 bottles of oxycodone. Just saying that is an order, whether it's written down or whether it's verbal, that constitutes an order. And so that hole has been plugged. Orders received under suspicious circumstances. This is kind of interesting and kind of important because it codifies another definition. There was always, especially with the master's case, order of interest, right? Flagged order, potentially suspicious order, right? There's all these definitions where now it's codified, right? It's just plugging another hole. The Support Act really does a good job in a lot of aspects in plugging the holes of the original CFR. So order received under suspicious circumstances is fully defined as an order potentially meeting the definition of suspicious order. It's really just to address the extensive confusion of flagged order versus suspicious order versus order of interest, et cetera, so on. So that was, that was a good thing. So the new definition of suspicious order, this is interesting. So it includes, but does not anymore limit the definition of suspicious order. So the historical definition of a suspicious order was order of unusual size, deviating substantially from a normal pattern, or an order of unusual frequency. With this new definition is basically including but not limited to all those things. So for example, if well, I won't get into it, but it just kind of opens the door to other types of suspicious activity, right? You haven't ordered, well, I guess you haven't ordered, now you're ordering is kind of a pattern thing, but yeah, so it just basically allows it to expand from size, pattern, and frequency to other potential issues that an order might have. Maybe it's by who's ordering it, or that it's, that the registrant name change, or whatever it might be. It just opens up the door a little bit so that nothing is slipping through the cracks. So in kind of going back to that, specifically with suspicious orders, the inclusion of facts and circumstances within the definition of a suspicious order is what specifically brought in what was historically a statistical analysis. And both facts and circumstances is including the definition of suspicious order as well as due diligence, which really kind of points to saying, look at the whole story. It's not enough just to look at statistical. It's not enough to look at SOM or whatever. This is a holistic effort to prevent diversion of controlled substances, really. And then finally, one more piece of the suspicious order activity is that there's a SOM requirement for additional business models that distribute. Originally, it really kind of focused on companies, entities that were registered with the DEA as distributors. Now it applies to registrants that are authorized to distribute controlled substance in general, including but not limited to manufacturers, importers, practitioners, practitioners who distribute controlled substance pursuant to the 5% rule, narcotic treatment programs, just distributing in bulk form to other narcotic treatment programs. So moving right along to additional procedures. So for identifying and reporting suspicious orders. So the framework is really important. Whereas, the original framework was not actually open. It could be interpreted to be open. The framework to, identifying, not even identifying, but performing due diligence and coming up with the disposition of a suspicious order, right? Is it suspicious? Is it not suspicious? The Support Act closes the framework of how a suspicious order kind of works through the workflow into a two-part framework. Either one, the two-part framework is one, the order is suspicious, you decline to ship the order and report the suspicious order to the DEA. Or B, you investigate the order, dispel each circumstance within 7 days, and you're able to ship the product. So a key part of that is within the 7 days. So you have to dispel suspicions within 7 days. That's important because you can't just leave a controlled, potentially suspicious controlled substance order on the in your queue for forever, right? It has to be action. It has to go one way or another. It has to be approved or has to be declined and marked as suspicious and so on. So that's a pretty big piece for industry, is that they only have 7 days, and there has to be controls put in place to address that. The reporting of the reporting of the suspicious orders. This is really important because I think it pertains to a handful of entities. Deneen, if I missed that, I think it's Tennessee and Florida require reporting of suspicious orders. Ohio, California, I believe so. Is that right?
Yes. There's quite a few out there, but those are the big ones that are requiring reporting of suspicious orders. West Virginia is one of them. Most of them now have updated to some degree, some type of reporting.
Perfect. Thank you, Deneen. So along those lines, this specifically codifies that suspicious orders be reported to the DEA centralized database. Originally, suspicious orders would be reported to the like local offices and not go to HQ, and then and the SORS, the suspicious online orders report system online, came out, and it started going to headquarters directly, and then et cetera, so on. That's where a lot of the data analysis comes in from. And so it's really a long time coming, but finally there's an online component to reporting suspicious orders. It was released originally in October of 2019, and now it's codified within rules just a couple of years later. Finally, what was expanded was record keeping. And basically the provision stipulates that records on suspicious orders must be kept for a period of at least 2 years. Record must include what qualified the order as suspicious, or why a company thought it was received under suspicious circumstances, the due diligence performed, and whether or not the order was actually shipped to the customer. So the impact to state agencies, I kind of touched on it, is will reporting as required by state agencies of suspicious orders decrease if registrants have 7 days to investigate prior to reporting. And so the idea is most likely there will be an increase of orders, and so state agencies that request suspicious orders be sent to them as well. I think like a handful of states that Deneen mentioned. So if you only have a 7-day framework, and a lot of these due diligence definition was expanded, state agencies can relatively expect that the most likely that the volume of suspicious orders will increase, which can obviously very significantly impact agencies, in case they're being proactive and also looking at suspicious orders and whatnot, and who the customers are. So expect an increased volume there. And then secondly, the impact is what changes would a state see now that practitioners and NTPs that distribute pursuant to the DEA's 5% rule be required to identify and report suspicious orders. So it's basically, with some of these expansions, are state agencies going to additionally follow these expansions, right? We've all heard about the FDA proposed rules that were released earlier this year, and might come into effect over the next couple of years, that are substantially affecting distributor and 3PL standards. Kind of on that same note, will state agencies with some of these expanded definitions, are state agencies going to also require that practitioners and NDPs perform suspicious order monitoring and report suspicious order monitoring, et cetera, and so on. And so yeah, so that's a couple of the things that the state agencies have to start thinking about is, are there going to be additional rules to address these expanded definitions, et cetera, and so on. And then, yeah, it really comes down to the waiting game. Will we see the final rule 6/22, June 20 of 22? We attended, the company attended the HDA meeting in, I think it was in March, and we heard directly from the DEA. And from what we understand, it got passed to the OMB, the office, the budget office and stuff, the regular rulemaking, agency that goes and rubber stamps all the rules coming out. And so they suggested that it can take as little as 4 months, as much as 9 months, but over a year isn't completely unheard of. And so 6/22 would put us, pretty low on that scale. We're really expecting by the end of 22 for the final rules to be passed and made effective. But potentially we might see it in 2023. So that pretty much wraps that up. I'll turn it over to Deneen to go over the bonus.
Okay, everyone. As we were preparing for this webinar, one of the things that we came across, and in case someone may have missed it, but on April 12th, the DEA published in the Federal Register notice of proposed rulemaking, another one, and it is revoking the exempted prescription product status for all butabitol products previously granted exemptions. And really that is your butabitol, APAP. APAP is shorthand if you're a pharmacist for acetaminophen, and the combinations is with the caffeine. For those that may not be familiar with exempted products, it is actually a ratio in combination products that the FDA believed were adequate amounts of non-narcotics to reduce the abuse potential of butabitol. So butabitol in and of itself is a Schedule 3. So when they looked at the butabitol with acetaminophen, the ratio that was determined was 70 milligrams of acetaminophen for every 15 milligrams of butabitol, which the Fioricet and its generics have. So they became exempted. But let's think about Fiorinol. Fiorinol is butabitol with aspirin in it, and the ratio requirement was at least 188 milligrams of aspirin for every 15 milligrams of butabitol to meet the CSA exemption. And unfortunately, the Fiorinol and its generic counterparts out there did not meet that. So butabitol, the butabitol with aspirin and with caffeine are all Schedule 3s. So this proposed rule is to, because of an uptick in seeing some abuse with the butabitol and Tylenol or acetaminophen and combination products occurring, they want to revoke that exemption and place the butabitol and acetaminophen product, combination products, into a Schedule 3 with the butabitol and butabitol aspirin containing products. So in general, I definitely foresee in the near future, how quickly, I'm not certain, but if we thought about SOMA and carisoprodolol, we had the rulemaking and it moved rather quickly that year to being approved as a rule. And then DEA gave 90 days for registrants to become compliant, and believe it or not, non-registrants, because it was a non-controlled product. So many companies that did not hold a DEA registration had to determine from the SOMA carisoprodolol, do they hold the product? Can they get a cage? What procedures and SOPs did they have to change? Or by the end of the 90 days or when it became effective, the product had to be out of their facility. So I do anticipate we're going to see the same thing. You're going to find companies that worked with the Fioricet that do not work with controlled substances at all. It's going to have to make in 90 days a decision. Once the rule passes, they'll have 90 days to determine what they're going to do, their course of action. If you already hold a DEA registration, and you include C3, so you have a cage, it's basically moving your product into the cage and doing an opening inventory and ensuring all of your computer systems reflect this product is now a C3, which is going to be your SOMs, how you receive the product, how you ship the product, for state boards of pharmacy, how you will be looking at this product and ensuring that your pharmacy through dispensing is capturing it. So I did just want to bring this up as an awareness, that you can continue watching the DEA site for more information. But again, I think this is probably a very easy one. There was little to no comments that this will get reclassified. And if they use the other hydrocodone and the carisoprodolol SOMA products, your registrants, the supply chain will have about 90 days to get into compliance. So just something to keep in the back of your mind and to keep watching on.
And just a quick note too, we do understand and we do see that a lot of states have control or do schedule products that aren't scheduled at the federal level. It's like, gabapentin is a big one, and I think in Kentucky, and propofol is a big one in North Dakota for some of our clients, et cetera, and so on. So we do keep an eye on that as well. So that's always keeps things interesting.
So
other than that,
we
yeah,
have
please.
we have about 10 minutes
Mhm.
and we need to, oh, perfect timing then. So we actually have several questions that people have posed in the chat box. If people have additional questions, please type them in. What is the best process for the pharmacy to communicate the need for product? Many pharmacies are reporting a below current patient need of the controlled substance.
So the first one makes sense. The statement is a little bit confusing. Many pharmacies are reporting a below current patient need of the controlled substances. Does that mean that that wholesalers aren't filling orders? Because we have heard about that. So I guess what's the best process for the pharmacy to communicate the need for product with wholesalers? I mean, it's relatively straightforward. Everybody, with the sales rep, or there's online portals, there's email, there's phone calls, et cetera, and so on. I mean, it's just like any other product. Okay, thank you for the clarification. Yes, not filling product. Oh, okay, yeah. So pharmacies are ordering, but wholesalers aren't filling the orders, et cetera, and so on. So I think, as with everything, obviously, as everybody knows, opioid epidemic was is a very kind of horrific phenomenon in American history, and accordingly, regulators and the public gave it a lot of attention, and it really swung one way where there's a lot of SOM regulation and whatnot. Some would say, especially if pharmacies are not being able to fill prescriptions that are legitimate medical needs, that we might have swung a little bit too far one way. And DEA has actually stated, I think in the HDA presentation, they did say that they want to support industry, and basically they were admitting that it did swing very far on the conservative, highly regulated front, to the point where I think it was Cardinal was actually sued, and they lost because Cardinal said, we're not filling your orders anymore. This is you're a suspicious pharmacy. And the pharmacy fought back. They sued Cardinal, and they said, no, this is for actual legitimate patient need. You're cutting us off. You're not letting us do business, and B, more importantly, the patient is suffering because we can't get them product. And Cardinal lost, and basically the judge ruled the restraining order was that you have to fill this product. So it's a phenomenon. A lot of companies are obviously very nervous about filling controlled substances. Parmed, a Cardinal subsidiary, one of the largest generic wholesale drug distributors in the U.S., they stopped controlled substances. I think IPC, Independent Pharmacy Cooperative, massive wholesaler, pharmacy cooperative, they also stopped selling controlled substances, I think just within the last 6 months. And so so we're very aware of it. And it really just comes, please go ahead.
So there's another question, because I just want to be mindful of the time.
Oh,
sorry, I may have missed it. Did DEA indicate that once the rule is finalized, there may be any sort of implementation grace period in terms of when the rule is effective?
I actually am not aware. I know generally most state boards of pharmacy and even the FDA will give you, FDA, for example, for the proposed rule is giving a 2-year grace period. So I assume there would be a grace period. I just don't know that. I don't know that off the top of my head. I don't know if, great question, Deneen, if you know or not, but otherwise, I'm sure we can find out for you.
Yeah, for the suspicious order monitoring part, I'm not certain how quickly they would implement or give a grace period on that one.
Okay. Is the 90 days for compliance of the butyl, whatever, however you pronounce that, sorry, final rule a certainty, or is it reflective of what DEA is likely to provide based on prior such scheduling decisions?
That is, right now, it is not in the final rule. Comment period just closed in May. So they'll be reviewing all of that. When the final rule comes out is when they will put an effective date and provide how many days you have to prepare. The 90 days is really historical from, I was involved with both the tramadol, I was involved with the SOMA and the hydrocodone. Hydrocodone had a much longer time on it, but I do know the tramadol and the SOMA carisoprodolol, it was quite quick. And the tramadol was the 90 days. They issued the final rule like in September. And by mid-October, we were having one of our sites determining what we were going to do with the product. So again, that is from my personal experience of all three. They will give us some time frame, but I think with butabidol products already being scheduled, that the time frame to come into compliance is going to be on one of DEA's shorter ends that they tend to use.
And if we find anything out ourselves, we'll post it on our announcement page on our website, which is www.nasca.org. One additional question, if a pharmacy has a large quantity of prescriptions for a valid DC2, is it best to preemptively let the wholesaler know what the issue is?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Letting the wholesaler know what the issue is, who you're really talking to is the sales rep. And traditionally the sales team isn't really allowed to speak to the compliance team. And, best practice says that the two separate teams and they're not allowed to speak to each other, because you don't want a cardinal situation where they're gaming the system, what have you. And so you can absolutely preemptively let the wholesaler know what the issue is. It might help where a sales rep, gets the information, does the due diligence, and then passes that along to compliance. And it might be a little bit easier, faster, better experience for the pharmacy. But compliance makes their own decision, does their own due diligence, which, and they'll reach out to the pharmacy individually. But again, I'm talking hypotheticals here and best practices, which varies very greatly with what actually happens on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, I think I have one additional question. Will the recording of this webinar also be made available? And the answer to that is yes. We will be sending it out. Sorry, had to turn off my phone. We will be sending it out probably early next week. Hi, Anita. I haven't seen you in a long time. So anyway, so yes, it'll be a copy of the PowerPoint slides and, well, actually a copy of the recording sent out to everybody who registered.
Okay, looks like we are right at time. And so Sumit and Janine, thank you for sharing your insight and expertise and providing this excellent and informative presentation. It's really quite timely and provided the audience with what we need to move forward in this compliance space. So thank you again. If there are no further questions, we'll close. On behalf of the National Association of State-Controlled Substance Authorities, I would like to thank everyone who joined us for today's webinar. Again, thank you to our sponsors for making today's webinar possible. We are grateful to the speakers and to those who took the time out to attend and learn about this very important topic. Have a wonderful rest of your day and see you next time.